Welcome to Psychology for People in a Hurry. Today, we're diving into What My Bones Know by Stephanie Foo, a powerful memoir that uncovers the raw realities of trauma and the extraordinary journey of healing. Have you ever felt like the pain you carry isn't just a part of your past, but a part of who you are? Like it's been woven so deeply into your identity that you don't know where it ends and you begin? For Stephanie Foo, this wasn't just a passing feeling, it was her reality. Here's the backdrop. Stephanie was born in Malaysia and immigrated to the United States at just 2.5 years old. On the surface, her life looks extraordinary. She's an Emmy-winning radio producer, a masterful storyteller, and a creative force. But behind the accolades, there's a history, a past she's had to fight to face. Her story highlights dynamics familiar to some East Asian families, where discipline is often intertwined with expressions of care and love. The result? A childhood filled with constant messages of inadequacy. For Stephanie, it meant growing up in a world where pain was normal, where love felt distant and conditional, something she wasn't sure she deserved. And she carried that with her for years, buried beneath her success until it all came crashing down. In 2019, Stephanie was diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress disorder, or CPTSD. This isn't the kind of trauma that comes from one singular, catastrophic event. No, it's a slow, relentless burn, the harm inflicted over years, often by the very people who are supposed to protect you. It's the kind of trauma that becomes invisible because it's so normalized. You don't even see it as trauma. You just think, this is who I am. But Stephanie refused to let that be the end of her story. She made the decision to confront it, to untangle the knots of her past, to face the pain, and to find a way forward. Over 4 years, she immersed herself in the work of healing, therapy, research, reflection. She tried, failed, learned, and kept going. She rebuilt herself piece by piece, and in the process, she found a kind of peace she once thought was out of reach. This book, What My Bones Know, is the result of that journey. It's not just her story, it's a guide, a beacon for anyone who's carrying their own invisible wounds. For anyone who's ever asked themselves, can I ever be free from this? So, let's break it down. First, we'll look at Stephanie's early years, the tangled, complicated web of love and harm that defined her childhood. Then, we'll walk with her on her path to healing, seeing how she broke free from the belief that her trauma was her identity. This is a story of redemption, a story of resilience, and, above all, a story about the quiet but powerful truth that healing is possible, even when it feels impossibly far away. Stephanie Foo's story begins with a childhood steeped in contradictions, love tangled with harm, discipline disguised as cruelty, and a constant sense of never belonging. At just 2.5 years old, Stephanie and her parents moved from Malaysia to California, chasing the dream of a better life. But that dream came with sharp edges. Her father, a self-made man who rose from poverty, brought his ambition and a rigid sense of control. Her mother, a bank teller who married after just 2 months of courtship, carried a volatile mix of hopes and resentment. From the start, Stephanie was caught in the crossfire of their unrelenting expectations. High grades weren't just encouraged, they were demanded. Even her diary entries weren't safe, graded by her mother with giant marks of disapproval. Discipline at home was strict, and Stephanie often felt the heavy consequences of not meeting expectations. But the emotional challenges were even more profound. Her mother's instability cast a shadow over their household. Stephanie grew up witnessing moments of deep struggle and blame that left emotional scars. The words, "It's your fault," echoed in ways that shaped her sense of self, making her question her worth beyond the physical marks of discipline. Her father was often absent, immersed in work or detached, leaving Stephanie to mediate between her parents' intense disagreements. She took on the role of peacemaker, trying desperately to maintain harmony. Despite her efforts, cleaning up after her father or suggesting gifts to soothe her mother, it was never enough. This relentless cycle fostered a belief in Stephanie that she would never be worthy of love or peace. Amid the challenges, Stephanie found a brief escape online. Late at night, she read web novels and connected with friends in secret chat rooms. When her mother restricted her access to the internet, Stephanie found herself compelled to assert her independence. By the time her parents divorced when she was 13, chaos had become her constant. Living with her father, she experienced a strange freedom for the first time, no one dictating her every move, but it came with its own darkness. Her father, bitter and angry, vented his frustrations on Stephanie. She, in turn, learned to weaponize her pain, channeling it into hatred. If someone crossed her, she retaliated with ferocity. Classmates feared her, and isolation became her closest companion. Yet, even in the darkest moments, Stephanie showed resilience. One night, when her father threatened to harm himself and her, she stood her ground, axe in hand, and declared, "You're not allowed to threaten my safety anymore." It was a turning point, a defiance born of survival, but it came at a steep emotional cost. 3 things kept Stephanie grounded: her drive to succeed, a pact with friends to reject self-harm as an option, and her love of storytelling. In high school, journalism became her sanctuary, a way to find purpose and transform her pain into meaningful stories. Despite her middling GPA, her dedication earned her a spot at UC Santa Cruz. At her high school graduation, she stood tall, not for her absent parents, but for herself. But healing doesn't follow a straight path. In college, she honed a sharp wit and an even sharper edge. Success came at a cost, friends fell away, enemies grew, and her self-loathing deepened. She worked relentlessly, burying her pain under long hours and numbing it with sleeping pills. On the surface, her career soared. She hosted a podcast with 500,000 listeners and mingled with San Francisco's elite. But inside, she was crumbling. By early 2018, the cracks could no longer be hidden. Panic attacks, tears, and a sense of doom overtook her. Stephanie reached a breaking point and made a bold choice. She quit her job, telling her boss, "My job now is to heal." It was the first step in a journey that would redefine her life. The turning point came with a diagnosis that gave her pain a name: complex post-traumatic stress disorder, or CPTSD. Unlike traditional PTSD, rooted in a singular traumatic event, CPTSD stems from years of relentless harm, often inflicted by those meant to protect you. Stephanie described it best: if you're punished for hundreds of mistakes, every mistake becomes dangerous. If you've been abandoned by dozens of people, everyone becomes untrustworthy. The world itself feels like a threat. CPTSD rewires your very sense of self. It blurs the line between what's healthy and what's harmful. Stephanie described her healing process as rebuilding herself from scratch. "It's about relearning how to be a person," she said. Her journey began by leaning on what she knew best: journalism. She sought out experts, starting with neuroscientist Lisa Feldman Barrett, who gave her simple yet profound advice: get to know your body. Trauma, Barrett explained, disconnects us from the signals our bodies send. Basic needs like sleep, hydration, and nutrition become harder to interpret. Stephanie began prioritizing these essentials, and the results were immediate. For the first time in years, she felt enough energy to confront the deeper roots of her pain. Therapy was her next step. One of her therapists, Eleanor, helped Stephanie rate her most traumatic childhood memories. At first, Stephanie scored them surprisingly low: beatings, insults, moments that no longer felt significant. Eleanor explained that this detachment was dissociation, a coping mechanism that had allowed her to survive but also prevented her from processing her emotions. In one session, Eleanor asked Stephanie to revisit a specific memory: her mother beating her with a wire hanger while yelling about wasted money. 6-year-old Stephanie had begged through tears, promising to do better. Eleanor guided her to imagine a protector, someone who could shield her younger self. At first, Stephanie pictured her boyfriend, Joey, stepping in, but the child within her resisted, still craving her mother's love. Finally, adult Stephanie entered the memory herself. "You don't need to stay here," she told her younger self. There are so many kinds of love in this world. You will find people who love you the way you deserve. That moment changed everything. Stephanie realized two truths. A wound that doesn't hurt anymore isn't necessarily healed, and her parents had never truly loved her, not in the way she had hoped. Acknowledging this was both devastating and liberating. For the first time, she stopped excusing their behavior. From there, Stephanie explored mindfulness techniques like yoga, meditation, and grounding exercises. One practice, color counting, focusing on finding all the red objects in a room, helped her disrupt spiraling thoughts. During yoga, she found herself crying unexpectedly. The simple act of stretching, breathing, and resting under a blanket gave her a sense of safety she had never known. For the first time, I felt cared for, not by anyone else, but by myself, she wrote. Still, these techniques were temporary. Real healing required deeper work. Stephanie returned to her childhood neighborhood and spoke with people from similar immigrant backgrounds. Conversations with sociologists revealed that her pain wasn't entirely personal, it was generational. Immigrant families often carry unspoken burdens, passing down trauma through silence and unprocessed pain. As she learned more about her parents' pasts, her father surviving war, her mother being abandoned as a child, her anger softened, though it didn't absolve them. She realized their actions were shaped by their own unhealed wounds. But did that excuse their behavior? The answer was complicated. Stephanie considered cutting ties with her parents altogether, but found that estrangement didn't erase the pain. Instead, she turned to reparenting, a therapeutic practice where she nurtured her inner child. When frustration arose, she'd comfort herself with compassion instead of blame, offering the kindness she had never received. Rebuilding relationships became another focus. Trauma expert Jacob Ham explained that CPTSD is relational at its core. Healing requires trust. Ham compared relationships to sports. They take practice and repetition. Stephanie learned to listen, create space for vulnerability, and rebuild her confidence in connecting with others. Ham also reminded her of a crucial truth: not every negative emotion is a symptom of trauma. Sadness, anxiety, anger, these are part of being human, he said. Your emotions are meant to ebb and flow, just like your heartbeat. As of 2022, Stephanie acknowledges she's not fully healed. The beast of pain still returns, she wrote. But I've learned to quiet it, to send it back to its lair. Healing is a lifelong process. Though I carry sorrow, I've grown strong enough to dance in the moments between its visits. So, as we wrap up, let's take a moment to reflect on the journey we've explored today. What My Bones Know isn't just a memoir. It's a raw, unflinching dive into the complexities of trauma and the grueling path towards self-redemption. Stephanie Foo didn't just share her story, she offered us a roadmap, imperfect but deeply authentic, for understanding complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Through 4 relentless years of introspection, therapy, and experimentation, she confronted the wounds left by years of harm and betrayal, particularly within the context of East Asian family dynamics. Her journey reminds us of a truth we often forget: healing isn't linear. It's messy, chaotic, and full of setbacks, but it's also a process filled with resilience, growth, and self-discovery. Stephanie's approach, reconnecting with her body, revisiting her past, and reparenting her inner child, was deeply personal. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution, but it's a reminder that healing, while different for everyone, is always possible. Stephanie's path isn't universally replicable. Our resources, circumstances, and support systems differ. But one truth stands out: healing begins with hope. It starts with the decision to take one small step forward, even when the weight feels unbearable. If there's one takeaway from today, it's this: you are not defined by your pain or your past. You hold the power to rebuild, to stand tall, and to find those quiet moments where freedom quietly whispers its promise. If this message stirred something in you, let us know in the comments. Hit like to remind others they're not alone, and subscribe for more stories that remind us of the strength we carry within. Your journey matters. Let's keep walking it together.